Is this some kind of joke? The man's voice, slick with manufactured authority, cut through the low hum of the charity gala. He stood with his arms crossed, a clipboard tucked under one of them like a scepter. His name tag read, Marcus, Event Director. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Dean Hamilton, 86 years old, did not move. He stood just inside the grand ballroom, his posture straight, his hands clasped calmly behind his back. He surveyed the opulent room, the crystal chandeliers dripping light onto tables draped in navy blue linen, the clinking of champagne glasses, the murmur of polite conversation from guests in tuxedos and evening gowns. His own suit, a simple red tweed, was clean and pressed, but it had seen decades of service, much like its owner. It was a relic in a room dedicated to the new and shiny. Marcus took a step closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss. Look, I don't know how you got past the front desk, but this is a private event, a very expensive one. It's for our nation's veterans. He said the word veterans, as if Dean couldn't possibly understand its meaning. We can't have you panhandling our donors. Dean's eyes, the color of a faded sky, finally settled on the event director. They were calm, observant, and held a depth that Marcus, in his youthful arrogance, completely failed to register. There was no anger, no fear, not even surprise. There was only a profound stillness, a patience forged in places Marcus's worst nightmares couldn't conjure. I have a ticket, Dean said, his voice a low, gravelly hum, the sound of rocks worn smooth by a relentless river. Marcus let out a short, incredulous laugh. Right, a ticket, he gestured impatiently. Let's see it then. And some identification while you're at it. Dean reached slowly into his inner jacket pocket, his movements deliberate and unhurried. The simple act seemed to infuriate Marcus, who tapped his foot with growing irritation. A few nearby guests had started to notice the quiet confrontation. A woman in a glittering emerald dress paused, her wineglass halfway to her lips. A man in a tailored suit nudged his companion, a silent gesture directing his attention to the unfolding drama at the ballroom entrance. The whispers began, quiet and sharp, like the rustle of dry leaves. Look at his suit. Is he homeless? How did he get in here? The security is so lax these days. The shame was meant for Dean, but it seemed to splash against him and pool at the feet of the onlookers, staining the polished marble floor. He remained the calm center of the growing storm. He produced a simple folded piece of paper, a standard ticket, and a worn leather wallet. He handed the ticket to Marcus, who snatched it from his hand. Marcus glanced at the ticket, his expression flickering with surprise before hardening again into suspicion. This was issued to a D. Hamilton. That's not you. It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. My name is Dean Hamilton, Dean replied, his voice even. ID, Marcus snapped, extending a demanding palm. Dean opened his wallet. The leather was cracked and soft with age, the corners rounded from a lifetime in his pocket. Inside, behind a yellowed plastic window, was his driver's license. The photo showed the same man, his face a little less lined, his eyes just as steady. Marcus barely looked at it. His gaze was fixed on something else, a small object tucked into a worn fabric sleeve inside the wallet. It was a small tarnished metal pin, shaped like a shield with a phantom cat etched into it. Marcus smirked, a cruel, condescending curl of his lip. He pointed a manicured finger at the pin. What's that? Some prize from a cereal box? A little toy to prove you're one of the good old boys? He looked around, trying to draw the nearby guests into his joke, to make them accomplices in his casual cruelty. Sir, this is a serious event for real heroes, not a clubhouse for whatever it is you are. The insult, sharp and public, finally seemed to register, not as a wound but as a trigger. For a fleeting second, the opulent ballroom dissolved around Dean. The scent of perfume and expensive food was replaced by the smell of wet earth and cordite. The polite murmurs became muffled shouts in a language he still heard in his sleep. The condescending face of the event director blurred, replaced by the grime-streaked face of a boy no older than 20, his eyes wide with fear and loyalty. That boy, Corporal Jensen, was pressing this very pin into Dean's palm. The mud of the forgotten hillside was cold and slick, the air thick with the metallic tang of blood. They're coming, Sergeant, Jensen had rasped, his breath catching. Take it. It was my father's. Don't let them. The pin was warm from the boy's dying hand, a small, solid weight in a world that had dissolved into chaos and terror. It wasn't a prize. It was a promise to survive, a promise to remember. The memory vanished as quickly as it came, a flash of lightning illuminating a storm-racked landscape. Dean was back in the ballroom. His hand, almost of its own accord, closed the wallet, shielding the pin from Marcus's mocking gaze. His expression hadn't changed, but something in his stillness had intensified. "I think you've caused enough of a disturbance," Marcus said, his patience finally snapping. He signaled across the room. Security. 2 men in ill-fitting black suits detached themselves from the wall and began to cross the floor. One was young, with a puffed-up chest and an eagerness for confrontation. The other was older, his face weary, his steps reluctant. He'd seen enough in his life to know that things were rarely as they seemed. As they approached, a young man standing near the catering station watched with a knot tightening in his stomach. He was a lance corporal in the Marines, volunteering at the event as an usher, resplendent in his dress blues. He was supposed to be a symbol of the very cause this gala was celebrating. Yet he was watching an old man, who carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of a lifelong soldier, being treated like a piece of trash. He'd seen the interaction, heard the sneering tone, and most importantly, he'd seen the pin. He didn't recognize the exact insignia, but he recognized its significance. It was a unit crest. It was history. It was sacred. Protocol dictated he stay out of it, that he let the event staff handle their business. But his gut, an instinct honed by training that valued honor above all else, screamed at him. He couldn't challenge the director. Not here, not now, but he could do something else. As the 2 security guards reached Dean, the younger one placing a firm hand on his elbow, the Marine discreetly turned his back to the scene. He pulled out his personal cell phone, his fingers flying across the screen. He scrolled to a contact labeled Colonel Vance. He knew the colonel was here tonight, in the VIP reception on the mezzanine level. He pressed call, his heart pounding against his ribs. The security guards were now trying to move Dean toward the exit. "Let's go, old-timer," the young guard said, his grip tightening. "Nice and easy." Dean didn't resist, but he didn't help either. He became an immovable object, rooted to the spot not by physical strength, but by an unshakable dignity. The older guard looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting around at the watching crowd. "Let's just take this outside, sir," he said, his voice respectful, a stark contrast to his partner's aggression. The phone on the other end picked up. "Vance." The colonel's voice was crisp. "Colonel, it's Lance Corporal Davies from the volunteer detail," the young Marine whispered, cupping the phone. "Sir, I'm sorry to bother you, but you need to get down to the main ballroom. Right now." "What is it, Davies?" They're throwing a man out, sir. An old gentleman. The event director thinks he's a vagrant." He paused, taking a breath. "Sir, there's something about him. The way he carries himself. And I saw his wallet. He has an old unit pin. I think they're making a mistake. A very big mistake. A lot of old vets come to these things, son. I can't intervene in every dispute with hotel security." "Sir," Davies pressed, his voice tight with urgency. They called him by his name. "It's Hamilton. Dean Hamilton." The line went silent for a moment. The young Marine could hear the clinking of glasses and distant laughter from the VIP lounge suddenly stop. When the colonel's voice returned, all traces of casual authority were gone. It was replaced by a tone of cold, sharp alarm. "Stay right where you are, Corporal. Do not let him leave that building. Is the Admiral with me?" The last part was directed to someone else. There was a muffled, urgent exchange. Then the colonel was back on the line. "We're on our way." The call ended. The Marine, Davies, turned back to the scene. The guards were now forcefully pulling Dean towards the large double doors of the ballroom, a small, sad procession of public humiliation. Marcus was following close behind, a smug, satisfied look on his face. Davies felt a surge of hope. The cavalry was coming. The phone call had landed like a grenade in the quiet, exclusive atmosphere of the mezzanine VIP lounge. Colonel Vance, a man whose composure was legendary, had gone pale. He strode directly to the center of the room, where a distinguished, silver-haired man in the immaculate uniform of a Four-Star Admiral was holding court with a state senator. "Admiral," Vance said, his voice low but cutting through the chatter. He didn't wait for a polite opening. "Sir, apologies for the interruption. We have a situation." Admiral Thompson, a man accustomed to command, turned his full attention to the colonel. "What is it, Mark?" "It's downstairs, in the main ballroom. They're removing a guest." The Admiral raised a skeptical eyebrow. "And this requires my personal attention?" "The guest's name is Dean Hamilton," Vance said, the name hanging in the air between them. The change in Admiral Thompson was instantaneous and absolute. The jovial host vanished, replaced by the hardened warrior. His back straightened, his eyes narrowed, and a lifetime of command settled over his features like a steel mask. The senator standing beside him seemed to shrink, suddenly irrelevant. "Hamilton," the Admiral repeated, his voice a low growl. Dean Hamilton is in this building? He looked at Vance, his eyes blazing. And they're doing what to him? They think he's a homeless man who crashed the party, sir. Security is escorting him out as we speak. A thunderous silence fell over their small group. The Admiral's aides, who had been lingering nearby, snapped to attention. Get my cover, the Admiral commanded one of them, his voice like cracking ice. Mark, you're with me. He didn't offer an apology or an explanation to the bewildered senator. He simply turned on his heel and moved towards the grand staircase, his entourage falling in behind him like a phalanx. The message was clear. A senator was a guest, but Dean Hamilton was royalty. Downstairs, the final act of humiliation was playing out. The security guards had managed to drag Dean across the threshold into the grand echoing foyer of the hotel. Marcus, the event director, followed them out, wanting to deliver the final, crushing blow. He felt powerful, having excised the blemish from his perfect, polished event. He stepped in front of Dean, blocking his path to the street. Let this be a lesson to you, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. There are places for people like you, and this is not one of them. We have standards here. We are celebrating genuine American heroes tonight, men of substance and standing. We can't have their honor tainted by your presence. He gestured vaguely to the street. Now, if you don't leave the premises immediately, my next call will be to the police. Perhaps they can find you a bed for the night. Or better yet, get you a psychiatric evaluation. Clearly, you're confused about where you belong. It was the ultimate overreach, the final, unforgivable insult. He wasn't just ejecting a man. He was erasing his identity, his history, his very worth. The older security guard flinched. The younger one just held on, his knuckles white on Dean's arm. And then the sound of movement from behind them, sharp rhythmic footsteps on the marble floor, a sudden chill in the air. Marcus turned, an annoyed expression on his face, ready to dismiss whoever was interrupting his moment of triumph. The expression froze, then melted into slack-jawed disbelief. Striding toward them was Admiral Thompson, 4 stars glittering on his collar, his face a mask of cold fury. He was flanked by Colonel Vance and 2 junior officers, their own expressions grim and determined. The small group moved with an unstoppable momentum, parting the small crowd that had gathered in the foyer to watch the spectacle. The air crackled with an authority that made Marcus's manufactured power seem like a child's game. They stopped less than 5 feet from the pathetic scene. The Admiral's eyes, sharp and piercing, swept past Marcus as if he were a piece of furniture. They ignored the security guards. They landed on one person and one person only, Dean Hamilton. The younger guard, still gripping Dean's arm, suddenly felt the Admiral's gaze on him. He felt the weight of 4 stars, of a lifetime of command, of the entire United States Navy, pressing down on his hand. He let go as if he'd been burned. In the cavernous, silent foyer, Admiral Thompson took 3 more steps forward. He stopped directly in front of the old man in the worn tweed suit. For a moment, the 2 men just looked at each other. The decorated leader of the modern Navy and the forgotten ghost of its past. Then, with a precision that was both breathtaking and damning, Admiral Thompson's body snapped to the position of attention. His right hand came up in a salute so sharp, so perfect it seemed to cut the air. It was a gesture of profound, unconditional respect. The highest honor one warrior could bestow upon another. Sergeant Major, the Admiral's voice boomed, echoing off the marble walls. The title alone was a shockwave. Dean, it is a profound honor to be in your presence tonight. The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus's face was a mess of confusion and dawning horror. The security guards looked at each other in panic. The guests who had been whispering moments before were now statues, their mouths hanging open. The Admiral held his salute, his eyes locked on Dean's. Dean, in turn, gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod, acknowledging the gesture. He did not salute back. That was not his place, not anymore. He simply accepted the honor with the quiet grace he had shown all evening. After a long moment, the Admiral lowered his hand. He then turned, not to Marcus, but to the assembled crowd of onlookers, his voice ringing with a power that commanded their total attention. For those of you who don't know, he began, his voice resonating with history, and for those of you who have forgotten, allow me to introduce you. This is Sergeant Major Dean Hamilton. He paused, letting the ranks settle in. Some of you tonight donated generously to build monuments of stone and bronze. Well, you are standing in the presence of a living one. He took a step to the side, placing a hand gently on Dean's shoulder. In the winter of 1950, on a frozen nightmare of a hill in Korea that history has forgotten, this man, then a sergeant, held the line. He and 6 surviving Marines stood against an entire battalion for 2 days. Not for glory, not for a medal, but for the men to their left and right. When reinforcements finally arrived, they found Sergeant Hamilton, alone and still fighting, using the enemy's own weapons against them because his were empty. The press called him the Ghost of Hill 734, because no one believed a single man could have survived, let alone prevailed. A wave of gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Phones were slowly being raised, not to mock but to record, to bear witness. The Admiral wasn't finished. His voice grew more personal, thick with an emotion he rarely showed. 30 years ago, my own father, a young captain at the time, lay bleeding out in a jungle halfway around the world. His platoon had been ambushed, their comms were down, and all hope was lost. One man crawled through a quarter-mile of enemy fire, taking 2 bullets in the process, to drag my father and 3 others to safety. That man was Sergeant Major Dean Hamilton. The Admiral's eyes were now shining with unshed tears. He never received the Medal of Honor he was recommended for. He said others were more deserving. He took a quiet Navy cross and faded back into the ranks, asking for no recognition, no reward. He said the lives of his men were the only medal he needed. The Admiral turned his gaze, now as cold and unforgiving as a glacier, directly onto Marcus. His voice dropped, losing its oratorical boom and becoming a low, lethal weapon. "You," he said, the single word dripping with contempt. "You stand here in your $500 suit running a fundraiser for veterans, and you can't recognize true valor when it is standing 2 feet in front of you. You mistake a lifetime of sacrifice for vagrancy. You confuse honor with a bank statement." He took a step toward the terrified event director. "You have not just insulted this man. You have insulted my father's memory. You have insulted every man and woman who has ever worn the uniform of this nation. You are a disgrace to the very cause you claim to serve." He didn't need to fire him. He had already stripped him of every shred of authority and respect he possessed. He dismissed him with a final withering look and turned back to Dean. "Admiral," Dean said, his voice quiet but clear in the stunned silence. The young man, he was only trying to do his job, protecting the integrity of the event. He looked at Marcus, not with anger but with a startling flicker of something that looked like pity. Sometimes people get confused. They focus so hard on protecting the house that they forget about the people inside. The uniform changes, the mission changes, but the core duty to protect what's important, that never ends. He just made a mistake about what was important tonight. It was a lesson, not a rebuke, an act of grace so profound it was more damning to Marcus than any punishment. As Dean spoke, the image of that tarnished pin flashed once more. This time, the memory was complete. A young captain, his face pale from blood loss, presses the small metal shield into Dean's hand in a muddy, shell-torn jungle. "Get them out, Sergeant," the captain rasps. "And if you ever see my boy, you tell him his old man was proud." The boy, of course, was the man who was now Admiral Thompson. The pin was not just a memento. It was a testament, a direct link between the man being honored and the man being humiliated. Weeks trickled by. The video from the foyer, captured on a dozen phones, went viral. The charity, facing a public relations catastrophe, issued a formal and groveling apology. Marcus was summarily fired, his career in event management over. At Admiral Thompson's personal insistence, the charity's board mandated a new training program for all staff and volunteers at their events. It was a simple seminar, designed and led by Colonel Vance, titled "Honor Isn't Always in Uniform," recognizing our unassuming heroes. The first slide of the presentation was a candid photo of Dean Hamilton. One Tuesday morning, Dean was in his usual spot at a small neighborhood coffee shop, reading the newspaper and nursing a black coffee. The bell over the door chimed, and a young man walked in, looking hesitant and humbled. It was Marcus. He was wearing a simple polo shirt with the logo of a local landscaping company on it. He saw Dean, and for a moment it looked like he might turn and flee. Instead, he took a deep breath and walked over to the small table. "Mr. Hamilton," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Dean looked up from his paper, his expression unreadable. "Sir, there's nothing I can say, but I wanted to find you. I needed to look you in the eye and tell you that I am so sorry for everything." His apology was quiet, sincere, and stripped of all his former arrogance. Dean studied him for a long moment, then simply nodded toward the empty chair opposite him. "Sit down, son." He raised his hand to the girl behind the counter. "Get this young man a coffee." Marcus sat. They didn't speak of the incident again. They sat in a shared, quiet understanding. A lesson had been brutally taught, and humbly learned. When Dean finished his paper, he stood, gave Marcus a simple nod, and walked out into the morning sun, just another old man in a world that rarely saw the giants walking among them. His honor needed no gala, no applause, no recognition. It was, and always had been, carried quietly within. Thank you for joining us for this story from Veteran Valor. If you were moved by the courage and grace of heroes like Dean Hamilton, please like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel for more stories of unassuming valor.